And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I'm your host, Hank Garner, as always. And today it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Robyn Carr to the show. Robyn, if you have been hiding under a rock and are not sure who Robyn Carr is, maybe you're familiar with her book series that have also been translated into very popular television shows. I'm talking about Virgin River specifically, and Sullivan's Crossing, which has been a huge success in Canada and now has made its debut here in America. And a lot of folks talking about that series as well. But many of you know Robyn had and have been following her work for decades. And it's our pleasure to welcome Robyn today. Welcome to the show, Robyn.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, thank you. Robyn, I love to start the show with a fun question and to kind of set the tone. And one question I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's easy. I was I was a military wife, and I was stuck in a small apartment with no car and two little babies, and who are now almost as old as I am. And I was reading romances, not the little romances, but we didn't have a mass market industry back in the 70s. So I was reading paperback copies of reissues of classic novels like Catherine and The King's Gray Mare, historical novels mainly. And I thought, if it's fun to be kept up late at night for a good book, with a good book, and not be able to wait until the children had breakfast so I could read again in the morning, then wouldn't it be fun to write one? Well, I knew nothing about writing. I trained as a nurse. And
Mm.
so I bought myself, I walked to the grocery store every day with two babies in a stroller. I bought myself a notebook and a bunch of pens, and I started telling myself a story on paper. And I thought, this is cool. I really like this. What's going to happen next? I would always ask myself, what do you suppose could happen next? And it was really fun. Then, after a short period of time, I got serious.
So, well, let me ask this: what came first? Was it a character? Was it a scenario? I'm always fascinated with where stories begin. Some people are, say, where do you get your ideas from? And to me, that's not nearly as
No one
interesting
knows where they
as,
get them.
yeah, that there are story ideas everywhere. It's, what do you run with? But what usually comes to you first? Is it a character? Is it a plot device? What kind of kicks off that
Well,
creative
in the early
process?
days, and remember I was in my mid 20s,
Yeah.
and in the early days, because I was reading historical novels, I thought in terms of history, and I was thrilled to learn that most of those things were true, were real, that the kings and queens actually existed. So my first book started with the illegitimate daughter of a king. So it was kind of the scope and the setting that first drew me. Now there's no question about it. I have to start with the character and find out what he's up against or she's up against.
Yeah. When you got those notebooks and pens and started writing, did you finish that novel? Did you
Oh
carry that?
heavens, no. No, no. In fact, everything from kidnappings to murders happened in that novel, and it all happened in 45 pages. I didn't know anything. So my next quest was to go to the library and find books on how to write, which I did. And it was my third completed novel that sold, which is actually, everybody thought that made me a prodigy, right?
Right. Right. It's so funny. Writing is one of the pursuits that so many other things you kind of figure out before you put in a lot of work. if
Right.
this is going to be, you know, viable or not. But writing is one of those things that you have to put in all of the work up front and
Yes.
then decide if it's viable or not.
Yes, and when people are learning and they're in that learning stage, I often tell them, think of it as a college education. You're going to work for at least 4 years before you get it right,
Right. If you're lucky.
if you're
Y-
lucky.
Yeah. A lot of times it's a decade or more.
And you
That's
know, now that we have self publishing, I mean, we've always had self publishing,
sure,
but now
sure.
that it's so easy and inexpensive to self publish, I fear that people don't put in the time.
Yes, and I saw about 10 or 12 years ago we had the Kindle revolution, and then
Correct.
Amazon built this whole um, indie publishing or self publishing platform, to get works to publish, and it opened, like you said, it opened all these doors to people. But what
Too
we saw
soon.
is, yeah, too soon, and is that there's a certain level of gatekeeping that was happening that I think has kind of corrected, but it went too far to one end, and now I see that it's kind of coming back to the middle, where for whatever reason, as humans, we have to go to these extremes before we kind of find the path in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah,
am so grateful that it wasn't easy to self publish when I
yeah,
was struggling to. I mean, I have books, beloved books, that have been really successful that took 3 and 4 years to sell. I'm
yeah.
so glad self publishing wasn't available to me.
True, true. It,
Yeah.
it it forced you to hone your craft, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Well, you said that you trained as a nurse, and I didn't know that about you, but there's there's a theme that pops up in a lot of your work, and is
Yes, I
that there
know.
are
That is,
healthcare professionals that are
yes.
the heroes of your story, and that makes perfect sense now.
Yeah, well, but blame my kids. My son is a surgeon and my daughter is a police officer,
Okay, gotcha. Well, that makes perfect sense. Looking
doesn't
over your
it?
body of work, yeah.
It was nice of them to do that for me.
So how long did you? Well, you said it was your third book that
Yes.
got published. How long are we talking? Like from the time where you said I'm gonna buy some
I think
notebooks.
it was about 3 years.
Okay, okay.
And there
So
were
we're
there were a lot of false starts in there
yeah, yeah.
where I
At
started
what?
writing something and it just wasn't working and
Yeah.
throw it away and start again.
What that first book that sold? What was that story about?
It was titled Shalyn, which is a woman's name, and it's a long book. It was a historical novel set in Restoration England.
Okay.
One of the things I knew right away was that I would never write a book with a Russian base or setting. I couldn't get through the Tea Party at War and Peace.
Right.
So the English are kind enough to give us very simple, good names.
Yeah. Yeah. When did you kind of switch gears from the historical setting to a more modern contemporary setting?
After 10 years, after 10 years and as many novels, all published in hardcover, um, I was kind of burned out on Knights in Tights.
I understand that.
And
I
I
understand that.
love contemporary setting. I
Yeah.
love, love, love it.
Do you feel like it was a change in the market that drove that, or was it a change in you that?
No, it was definitely a change in me
Okay.
because every time I sent in a proposal of a contemporary novel, they'd say, "Well, what about Restoration England? What about medieval England? Well, what about?"
Mm,
And I'd say, "Just look at this."
gotcha. So, do you feel like that contemporary? Was there a market for contemporary then, like there is now?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. It was called the Romance Wars.
I, I
It was back when there was one when I started writing there was one contemporary romance publisher, Harlequin.
Right.
10 years later, there were at least 20.
Yeah.
And then Harlequin bought Silhouette, and we were almost back to one. Now, all the publishers publish some romances.
Yeah.
But as far as having a romance line like Second Chance at Love and Silhouette Romance and Harlequin Romance, we don't have that many lines anymore.
Well, it's so funny because we look at the landscape of publishing now, and we see all of these sea changes that are going on, and indie publishing being one of those things that have been introduced. And we see all this upheaval, but we really are kind of short sighted because, like you talked about with the romance wars, things like this have gone on in publishing forever. Yeah,
Forever. Do you
yeah,
remember attending ABA? And now we're back to ABA again. I mean,
right.
it's life is very long in this industry.
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I think I heard you say one time that you started writing, and forgive me if I get the dates wrong, but something like I started writing in 1978, and I didn't have my first bestseller until 2008
Oh,
or
you've got
something.
that exactly. That's exactly right.
How about that? How about that?
My first book sold in 78. I had my first bestseller in 2008, a mere 30 years.
A mere 30. It's
It
the blink of an eye.
went by like that.
Right. What now you obviously were not just barely scraping by those 30 years. You were a successful mid-list author. Is that safe to say?
I don't think you could even say that. I think I was merely scraping by. I had one book that was pretty successful. Well, I was a hardcover author. The library was my biggest customer.
Gotcha.
I had one book that was pretty successful called Mind Tryst, and it was the only thriller I ever wrote.
Wow.
It did try writing other thrillers, but it turns out I'm not very scary.
What motivated you to keep going? 30 years is a a lot of people would have said, maybe this is a fun hobby, but it's not, something that I can make a living at. I can't support a family. A lot of people would have just given up. Why did you not give up?
There's no telling. My daughter tells it this way. She said, the one thing that you really taught me is to never give up, never say die, never quit. And she said, you kept going and going and going when anybody with a brain would have gotten a job at Starbucks where they at least get benefits. I've made my peace with why I was writing a long time ago. I didn't think I would ever have a bestseller. And when I had my first bestseller, I thought, I think it was like number 37 on the extended New York Times list. And I thought, good, I can die a happy woman. I didn't know there
Little,
was anywhere to go from there.
yeah, little did you know where you would be sitting in 2023. That's the beautiful thing. You felt like you had achieved everything you ever thought, and then had no idea what was to come. That it has to be surreal looking back.
It is. And you know what? I'm glad it happened this way. Of course, I'm always glad everything happens
Of
the way it
course,
happens, but
of course,
but
it's the
um,
only one you've got.
it's the only way I've got. That's right.
So, what was the breakout book?
It was, I think it was the fourth or fifth Virgin River book.
Gotcha. What?
And there
Any
are
idea
12.
what? Any idea why that book resonated the way it did?
I think it was building with the Virgin River series.
Yeah.
And then the real beauty of it is that whole backlist, when they were
Yes.
reissued, they did just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when
I was
people
about
say,
to.
what was it? What did it? What did it? Was it an ad? Was it a marketing thing? Was it, you know what? The readers do it.
The readers, right? That it had a certain word of mouth that
It had
just,
great word of mouth.
yeah,
And when you get that book that readers can't shut up about, boy,
right.
readers talk, don't they? I mean, have you ever
Yes.
been accosted in a bookstore? Hey, you got to
Oh,
read
yes.
this. Yeah, many
Yes.
times.
I
Yeah.
have a couple of friends that when I go to their house, um, almost violently, recommend books to you.
I
You will
know.
take this and read it.
I
Okay,
had that
okay.
happen to me with somebody once told me that I had to read the Black Dagger Brotherhood, and I said,
Mm,
"Nah, I hate vampires." And they said, "No, this one you'll love." And I said, "Nah." And finally, somebody said to me, "If you'll read the first 50 pages and can stop, I'll never bring it up again."
oh
Well, so I
wow.
was at my own signing. No one was there. And I went over to the shelf and got the first book in that Black Dagger Brotherhood. And I was totally absorbed um, instantly. And when somebody came over to have me sign one of my own books, I went, busy here.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I
Well,
think the greatest compliment you can get from somebody is when they say, I had to call in sick to work because I needed to finish the series.
that's a fantastic compliment.
Isn't that
That is a
great?
fantastic compliment.
Or I was reading at stoplights.
Right, right. Well, imagine if the first Virgin River book would have been an instant New York Times bestseller. Imagine the pressure that would have put on book 2 and book 3 that had not
Ah,
been written yet. Having a fifth book become a breakout success not only allows you to have a back catalog to sell, which is amazing. But it also allows those to be organically what they already are, and not have the pressure. That's such a gift as well.
I'm just not one of those tortured writers. Never have been. I I write for pleasure and for fun
Yeah,
and for joy.
yeah. Is the Virgin River series still ongoing, or have you kind of
No,
closed the
it's
chapter on that
I
series?
stopped. I mean, I thought 21. Um, that's a little intimidating, and
Yeah,
sometimes you lose readers by going forever.
yeah.
They think they don't want to read the first one because if they like it, they'll have to read 20 more.
True, true. Do
So
you?
everything
Do,
must come to an end, and I think it's
yeah.
come to an end. You never know. I should never
You
say never.
right.
Next thing
Do
you
you?
know, I'll get an idea. And one thing about writers like me who are pantsters, right by the seat of their pants, I can't turn my nose up at a good idea. I don't get them that often.
I hear you. I hear you. Do you ever fear writing a character or a set of characters too long, that either you'll run out of good ideas to put them in, or if you spend too
Hey,
much time with anyone?
I run out of ideas in every book. In every book, I say, "Well, it happened. I knew it would happen. I'm empty. There's nothing up there."
Yeah.
Then
Well,
3 days later,
aha.
aha, I know what can happen.
Right. Do you there are certain hallmarks to your books, with whether we're talking about Virgin River or Sullivan's Crossing. There's a tight knit community of people, usually centered around a place, um, and then you find some way to torture these characters in this beautiful idyllic place. Um,
The poor people.
and the Friendship Club, your new book, is a little like that. On the surface, it looks very different, but when you get into the book and get into the meat of the characters, there's still a lot of Robyn Carr there, if you will.
Oh yeah, they're all. I hate to say they're all the same. They're really not, but but they're all women's fiction and romance.
Yeah,
In every book, you'll find a woman's issue that needs resolving, and you'll find a romance that needs completion. and there's always a sense of community. Somebody did a paper, a college paper, a postgraduate thesis on my books, and calling them socialist because they're like little communes.
Yep. True. Wow. Um, are you surprised ever because we use words like romance for genre, and a lot of times that will sort of segment your readers just because of the genre name. You'll have a lot of women readers. Men will tend to sort of shy away from some of these stories because they there's a certain stigma that comes, in the male's mind. Um, are you ever surprised when you see how much crossover there is in your readers? How many
Oh,
men
I
come
have
to
been
your
to Jersey
stories?
River. I've got a lot of men writing to me and
I
loving
bet.
it. And I'm not really sure why. I guess there's enough balls and guns and in the books to satisfy them, but they love it. They love it.
Yeah. That's and really that's kind of a hallmark of a writer who's connecting with readers is that you can bring in all sorts of readers and they're finding things that maybe you weren't even thinking about when you wrote it, and
Right,
there's
right.
connecting.
And
And
the demographic is astonishing. I've always liked having little relationship issues with teenagers and with middle-aged people and with elderly people, and it turns out my demographic is pretty much 19 to 90.
wow, that's amazing. That
And I
is
don't think
amazing.
I did it on purpose. It was just the way
Interesting.
I wanted to tell the story.
Yeah, yeah. Do you, as a self described pantser, as you said earlier, do you have any sort of roadmap when you begin a story? Do you go into the story with ideas about how a certain plot point is going to resolve, or a character's
Well, sure.
journey?
And
Okay.
I have
Do
an
you?
equal number that don't work out.
Of course, of course. Do you have any sort of planning process? That do you do any sort of pre-writing before the actual drafting of the novel begins? Have
No, I like
after
to
40
start on
something
page
books,
one.
what's your process like?
I like to start on page one. I love the idea that I don't know how it's going to end. I just know it will be a positive ending because that's kind of my moral center.
Sure, sure. Wow. Do you how long does it take to draft a book typically? I'm
You
sure
know,
after all of these years you've kind of come to a rhythm to your writing.
I do have kind of a rhythm. I've spent as long as 3 years on a book,
Wow.
and I've also gotten one done in 3 months.
Do, what's the difference in those two projects?
The
Like what?
difference is probably mostly with me and my mood
Mm, wow.
and what I want to deliver.
Yeah. Do
So here's a
you?
story for you.
Okay.
Uh,
Please.
my agent and I were knocking around. What could we do? What could I write about that I haven't already written about? And she said, a friend of mine found out her husband had an affair, and it's been over for years, but it lasted 5 years. And
Wow.
I said, can I write about that? And she said, sure, why not? And I said, I got to write about that. You work a lot of things out when you write about it. And so, not knowing whether that husband was just a fallible man or a bastard drove me through that book. And by the time I ended that book, I wanted to marry him.
I love it.
So that's how it all evolves.
Gotcha. Yeah, so many times you'll finish a book and look back over the story that you just told, and themes will emerge.
Right.
And maybe it's because this was just something you were thinking about or wrestling with in your subconscious, and it just kind of came through the writing. Or sometimes there's something on your mind when you begin the writing, and you sort of steer that. Do
Yes.
you how has that worked for you? Does that ever happen where you
Oh,
intentionally put
yes.
things in?
It's absolutely the way it happens. In fact, after my divorce, I wrote 5 books about cheating husbands. I'm so sick of cheating husbands. I hope I never have to run into another one. But it was in the front of my mind and I couldn't drive it out.
Wow.
So I write about it. And
So
that's
you wrote it out.
I wrote it out.
Love it.
Everything worked out in the end.
Apparently so. The Friendship Club is this a standalone book? Is this going to be the
Yes.
first in a new series?
No, it's a standalone book. I
Okay.
have, you know how you go down these rabbit holes at the computer all day long? I was getting torn in half by all the cooking shows. I don't even cook. I'm watching all of these cooking shows and I finally thought the only way out is in. So I'll write a book about a chef.
I love it. Um, how do you determine if a book is going to be a standalone or if a story idea has series potential?
I think you have to write at least most of the book. I thought Virgin River would be a standalone,
Really?
a small town romance. That's what I planned. By the
Well,
time I was halfway through it, I realized that these people have friends and they have a lot invested in their town, and it could go on indefinitely.
yeah. True, true. There have speaking of that, there have been some changes from the books to the television show. Some of them were necessary for the different narrative style of TV versus books. Some of the characters have been. I'm thinking of one particular couple that are a couple in the TV show that are not in the book. But how do you feel about the way things have to change for television? Does that bother you at all, or do you
No, not at
conceptualize
all.
them as two different things?
I see them as two completely different things. I make books, not movies, so I have a real hands off approach to that. Let them do what they must do. They are the movie makers.
True.
And some of the ideas that they come up with, I thought, well, I think my idea was better. And then other times I think, I wish I'd thought of that.
Right. Right. Love it. The Friendship Club publishes in January 23rd. Tell us about this story. Where did you said you were thinking about cooking and cooking shows? Where does this story take us?
Well, it stays with the chef, her assistant, who is also a chef, her a student that is um, kind of help. She's kind of an assistant helping, and her daughter, her pregnant daughter, and they're all their love interests. So it's another group, an ensemble cast, and a group of women sorting out women's issues and love issues.
Gotcha. Well, if we know anything about the publishing industry, the Friendship Club has been off of your desk for uh, a few months, probably, and while it goes through all the publishing machinations. What are you working on these days?
I am writing a book about an apartment complex,
Interesting.
and somebody
Speaking of small
inherits an
communities,
apartment complex, and there are a variety of characters in there, and they rub each other the right way and the wrong way.
love it. That's that perfect fodder for interpersonal tensions and uh, love and everything under the sun.
I wonder sometimes if I have a short attention span because I'm always writing about groups of characters.
Well, your audience has proven out that they're here for it. So you know, I wouldn't
They're
change a
great,
thing.
aren't they? They're up for anything.
That's right. That's right. Well, Robyn, this has been so much fun chatting. The Friendship Club comes out January 23rd, and you can go pre order it now. We'll put a link in the show notes, and you can either pre order it from Amazon or go to your local bookstore, support local books, put it on pre order there. Robyn, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
But thanks for inviting me, Hank. I had fun.